Welcome back everyone to Gotcha Interact. Today we're going to be looking at the first half of the 1.2 Wuthering Waves banners today. This character we're looking at is To Zhezhi. Let's go through this banner and see whether or not this character, or maybe even her weapon, is a good pulling option for your account. And if you do enjoy the video, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe and check out the rest of our channel for other videos that may interest you. We do also have a Discord, so be sure to check that out. Now, onto the video.
Now, talking about To Zhezhi, the idea behind the character, there's basically an idea when looking at her as a sub-DPS, basically like an off-field character. Now, while other characters have been able to do this, characters like Yinlin and others already in the game, To Zhezhi kind of makes this a little bit easier to do. Now, mainly it's because of her Resonance Liberation, summoning an Inklet Spirit, that as the active Resonator on the team is going to be dealing damage, the Inklet Spirit will also do a coordinated attack of Glacio damage, which is extremely nice to have. And it's kind of similar to what other characters have, but it's nice to see the physical attacks, I guess, from an actual summon. Now, the Resonance skill, on the other hand, is basically going to be based off of your bar at the bottom. Much alike to other characters, specifically like I was just talking about with Yinlin, at the bottom of the screen you'll see that bar for judgment points, and you'll be using those up to then deal a specific thing with her Forte Circuit. So the same thing here is with her skill. While using the bar at the bottom is called Afflatus, and you have a maximum of 90 of that. If you have up to 60, then when you use your skill, you can actually create 3 different spiritual sketches, which are basically summons that she puts on her right, left, and middle. Her Forte Circuit also allows her resonance skill to change, giving her a blink ability while also summoning another Crane Spirit as well. When you actually use this, you can then get stacks of certain things that increase some extra damage. There's some really great things in her kit that allow her to do a lot of specific damage from her own personal character while she's on field, but also her main way that she's going to be helping a team is mainly looking at extra damage on the outfield. And even when you're going in and out of swapping between different characters, like most other characters, she actually has a good buff for an outro skill, buffing resonance skill damage. So there's a lot of things with this character that you can see. Like I said though, mainly you're going to be focusing on that resonance liberation, possibly because, especially while you're doing that, the damage that it's doing is based off base attack damage, so it's going to be very nice to see and hear, as well as just have actually while your main damage dealer is doing damage on the front lines.
Now let's take a quick look at To Zhezhi's weapon. This has a main stat of crit damage at 72% when fully leveled. Now, regarding the passive on the weapon, we don't know too many specific numbers as there's just not enough information out there to give enough credibility to what we can actually know and expect for sure that is to be released in-game. But we do know that it does give some attack percent. You can stack a lot of normal attack damage with different stacks and durations. And upon using your outro skill, you're giving another buff to normal attack damage, especially when you're off field, which we know by having just gone over To Zhezhi's kit. We know that her liberation is a lot of off-field attacks based on her normal attack. So this definitely is going to be an awesome choice of weapon for her to use. But maybe let's say you don't want to go for her weapon. There are some good options. We also have String Master, which was Yinlin's weapon if you did pick that up. There's also the Cosmic Ripples. The standard 5-star, if you have that, is a good option just for the higher base attack. But if you don't have those options, I think you can get away perfectly fine with using Augment, which is the crit rate weapon, and that will be very comfortable on her, just so you are getting that extra crit and you can focus a little bit more on your crit damage in your builds.
Now we're going to be going into our summary, looking at To Zhezhi. As a question, do you need the character on your account? How valuable basically is she going to be? Now, like I was stating before, there are some other characters that can kind of do this off-field type idea as a character, but honestly, nothing like what we've seen with her. Kind of that summon idea, really looking into what she can do, some really cool stacks, especially with it based off of the damage that it's doing is actually basic attack damage, or just normal basic attack damage. So any buffs that you can give her could actually technically help her off-field. So there's some really, really cool things I think that could help the character out a little bit, but in general, I think mostly what you're going to see from her as a character, you're not going to see in other characters really being able to give. And just like some other characters, if you really want the extra buff in her outro skill where it increases resonance skill damage, there are some other characters like Tao Chi that also do that as well. So there's parts of her kit that can be given to other characters, but I don't think you're going to get something like this specific character outside of her. So I think she's a great valuable pull, but in my personal opinion, in terms of is she necessary to pull for an account, especially since we're all technically new players, because the game did just come out, we're in 1.2, starting 1.2 soon, it's not really like we have to have, you know, most of the characters out and we're looking for a lot of extra characters. Right now we're just looking for mainly DPS characters that can make sure to just do really well to push us to the end game or through the end game. So I think at this point in time, I don't feel like Zhezhi is a great pull for most people on this. Now, if you're a whale and you're pulling every single character, go ahead. But I do think that she's a pretty easy skip for a lot of people, especially with the other character on the other side of the banner that people are hyped for. I believe some people are hoping that we can get him for free, getting and looking for a nice weapon. So in terms of her value, I think it just has dropped a little bit more than some of the other characters that have come out recently.
Looking at our next question, this is where we ask what kinds of teams are you trying to build? And when looking at Zhezhi, we know she's another one of those characters that's kind of more focused on sub damage, doing damage from off field. Really the only other character that does that really well, at least, is Yinlin. And while being able to be used on field, and you know, I think that just has to do with the kind of game that Wuthering Waves is. Zhezhi, I think the best way you're gonna make some teams with her is actually, you know, focusing on her off-field damage through her liberation that's based on her normal attacks and having those summons, and actually using a driver or another main DPS, and then probably just another character to sustain, whether that's Verena, probably the best that we still have at this present time, but you could also probably use Tauchi. So when looking at your main DPS in a team with Zhezhi, I've seen a lot of people vouch for using Jin Si. I've also seen a lot of people substitute Jin Si with Chang Li. And if you don't have Arena, you can use Tauchi. She can be a great shielder, and she does increase a resonant skill damage. So if you are using Jinxi or Changli who likes that, then that's going to be really well anyways. But you could also use Verena here, and obviously she's going to do her job very well, as she's pretty much the best at it. And if you don't have her, well, then there's Baizhi. And Baizhi is also a pretty good healer. So those are some team options. I'm sure there's a lot of other things you could do out there, but in terms of like what's going to be best for Zhezhi and maybe even those other units, we know, for example, Jinxi likes to have other units that are dealing off-field damage with maybe coordinated attacks or something like that. And we do know that Zhezhi is doing that off-field damage, and it's also a different attribute than Spectro. So that is going to be helping Jinxi's incandescence, for example. So just knowing what synergies the other characters are going to have with each other is what's going to make, at the end of the day, a good team.
Looking at her weapon, I'm not really sure that this weapon is going to be a great pull in general. Like I already stated before about the character, her value is very, very good when you look at the teams. If you have Jinxi, if you have Changli, and her value is still pretty good. But I still think, like Riff just stated, the characters that you could use instead, like Tao Chi and then throwing in a healer, are already kind of there. Or maybe throwing in a different character, you know, just to throw something else out there. So it doesn't really feel like she's very necessary pull, which means that her weapon drops even more. Especially even if you're going to get this character, I don't feel like her weapon's very necessary. But I do think that if you know, once we'll talk about it in a second about resonance chains, I do think that like, because she ascends or goes into with her stat bonuses into crit rate, the weapon going to crit damage does allow for a very nice crit ratio, and then obviously that first resonance chain helping out with crit rate's very nice as well. But I just don't feel like the crit damage is extremely necessary. Even looking at her resonance liberation and looking at the amount of summons that she can get in those inklet spirits is going to allow her to just attack consistently. And usually I like to have a higher crit rate to allow for just consistency with the crits as well, which means that personally actually I'd rather go for a crit rate weapon or go full blown into more attack percent, which she already helps herself out with some of her inherent skills and whatnot. And even some weapons that can help with energy I don't think is necessarily a problem either, because like I stated before, the resonance liberation is just so necessary, which once again her inherent skill already helps out with. So I don't feel like it's really necessary to go after her weapon for most characters or most players that are actually going to pull her, and I really don't feel like most people really should pull her in the first place, which just really devalues her weapon overall for me anyways.
Lastly, let's look at some of the multiple copies of the characters, or in this sense of the game, resonance chains. And so when we look at Zhezhi's first resonance chain, this is called Anatomy, and it states that when casting resonance skill Stroke of Maestro, you will restore 15 resonance energy and increase crit rate by 10% for 25 seconds. Looking at her second resonance chain, this is called Vitality, and it just states that max inklet spirit summoned by resonance liberation will increase by 6. So when looking at both of these, They're both kind of a nice little upgrade, but they're not like anything crazy in and of themselves. I think just sitting at one copy of the character is going to be enough if you do decide to go for her. I would definitely say go for her weapon before you start going for multiple copies, just because weapon in that sense will probably just help her more for personal damage than even the resonance chains here will in this case. But I think between the two, and I think Vixen would agree with me, and he'll give his own opinions here in a second, but for me at least, I think the first one is a little bit better, just, you know, comparing between the two. And getting energy back is such a big deal just because we know that getting that liberation back is a big deal for Zhezhi, just because that's where most of her damage is coming from as a sub DPS type character. Also, the flat 10% increase to crit rate is going to feel very comfortable and just help out with your hyper building on your Zhezhi. And another reason that I think grabbing the weapon is going to help out a lot, because that's going to give you a lot of crit damage.
I do think that the first resonance chain is better. Like I stated before, the crit rate is going to be better for a much more balanced crit ratio. Obviously, if you are already having the first resonance chain, you should already, before going after resonance chains, before getting after multiple copies of a character, you should already have their weapon, their W engine, their light cone, whatever game you're playing. You should have that first before going usually after any copies of characters. So after looking at this though, you know, the resonance skill Stroke of Maestro is already going to be part of the Forte circuit, which is going to be enhanced in a certain way. And that is already great because of the resonance energy, the crit rate buff. I think the just combination of those two things, which she heavily balances off of, I think is going to be better than the increase to those Inklet spirits you could get in the R2. Although that is going to be nice, which means extra damage and more damage at the end of the day, technically, I just feel like more consistent damage. I don't really feel like the R2 really needs to be grabbed after. There's nothing crazy good about the R2 as of right now. As we get to see more of her gameplay and whatnot as soon as she releases, that might change, but for right now, that's probably where we both land. We hope that this video could help you decide on whether this character or her weapon are coming up on the next banner are for you. As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know down in the comments. Like normal with this specific video, we haven't seen really too much information about her, so we tried to scrounge around as much as possible about her. If you guys do and have figured anything out that has come out since the recording, please go ahead and let us know in the comments so that you can help us, as well as other players that are looking for information looking at Zhezhi. Make sure to like, subscribe, and check out the Discord as well. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.